the Army of the Potomac moving through this area pretty quickly. They're going to stop briefly in this area, especially the 2nd Corps is going to camp near the Spotsylvania Courthouse battlefield, but for the most part, they're moving quickly. But as both of these units are passing through the Spotsylvania Courthouse area, they're going to note how horrific the scene here at Spotsylvania Courthouse is. It's worse than most. You're dealing with a lot of hasty burials, if any burials, of the dead in the aftermath of the battle. You're dealing with a wrecked landscape that's covered in earthworks, the debris of battle, and the dead themselves. So for those who were here, they're still shocked to come back and see this. And they're overwhelmed with their memories of their time fighting here. But for those who weren't here, they're simply shocked and horrified and almost in disbelief about what they are seeing on this landscape. It's sure a little bit familiar to what they've seen on other battlefields, but there's little that really compares with the horror of Spotsylvania Courthouse. One man, David E Cronin, of the 1st New York Mounted Rifles, we'll hear a lot from him because he wrote an excellent account. He's stationed near Spotsylvania. He did not fight in the battle of May 12, 1864, but he's back here on May 12, 1865, because he's stationed in the area. He wrote here, "It seemed as if there had been a mighty whirlwind, gathering and distributing in the wildest disorder all of the equipments of a soldier, pieces of cloth of uniforms, caps in profusion, muskets and bayonets shattered and twisted, bayonet sheaths, haversacks, rusty canteens, glittering belt plates and buttons. It was the countless number of these relics that told of the havoc and anarchy of the battle." So we often think about, the dead left on the field, but think about the sheer volume of dead left on the field that Cronin describes there. On May 12th of 1865, you can stand hundreds of yards distant, as he writes, and still see the bones of the dead poking out of burial trenches, poking out of shallow graves here. It was a really, truly terrible and awful situation here. It's really, to me, it's totally unimaginable to think of death on that scale and to think of it visible on that level. Rice Bull, who comes through May 14th and 15th, 1865, so yesterday and the day before, 150 years ago, wrote, "On the south side of the trench," that would be the side we're standing on, of this trench right here, remember, on the south side of the trench, the Confederate dead had been given scant burial. As many as 100 skeletons were counted in a distance of not more than 200 feet. On the northern side, the dead were buried behind and facing the trench, the other side of the trench. So keep in mind that here the fighting was so close, you've got Confederates on one side, Union forces on just the other opposite side, and so the dead are going to fall just where they're fighting. On the northern side, the dead were buried behind and facing the trench. There were very many graves, each marked with a wooden headboard. On many parts of the field, the dead had not been buried, and as we looked over the ground where the charges had been made by our forces, we saw many places where there were growths of grass in the almost barren field. They marked the remains of Union soldiers, only a skeleton, encased in a moldy uniform of blue, with rusty gun and equipment at the side. It was a gruesome sight, and made us all the more thankful that the war was at last ended." So you see the horror of war expressed through these trenches, through the burials, the hasty burials that took place. Keep in mind that these soldiers have seen all of this before. Rice Bull's first battle was Chancellorsville, a pretty bloody affair. He really gets his baptism of fire on the morning of May 3rd, the bloodiest morning in American history. But think about the terms he uses to describe this scene 2 years after Chancellorsville, but just a year after the fighting at Spotsylvania Courthouse. So these soldiers have seen horrors before, but this really stands out in their minds. John D. Black returns to the battlefields, and he writes specifically that he returned to the battlefield because he wanted to look up points, as he said, of particular interest to him. So he had been on this battlefield before. There were certain places he wanted to revisit, spots that he wanted to see. And as he's walking back through the woods beyond this line to the south, he came upon a soldier. He wrote, "I was attracted by a bright scarlet object on a dark background, the peculiar shape of which aroused my curiosity. On reaching the object, I found it to be a soldier's fatigue cap, hanging on a twig or stub of brush that had been cut off in the fight, 5 or 6 inches from the ground. Beside it lay the form of a Union soldier. The red trefoil, the badge of our division and corps, on his cap identified him as one of the vedettes sent out the night after the battle to watch while his weary comrades slept. A bullet hole just below the badge told the simple tale. The blue uniform which enclosed his remains, washed by the dews and rains of heaven during the year that had passed, was as clean and bright as the day it was first worn." To Black, he's seeing someone who could very well have been a comrade. It isn't somebody that he recognizes, but it's just as easily somebody that he could have recognized. And so he doesn't see this as just a simple happenstance encounter. He's moved because he sees in this one soldier all of the soldiers that he fought with and all of the men that he knew. So he continued with his description, and he said, "No one had seen him fall. No one knew his fate. And so in the list of casualties reported after the battle, another soldier was simply missing. Who can tell of the weary waiting and watching and waiting of the loved and loving ones at home for tidings of the absent soldier boy? But could those loving ones have stood by his side on that beautiful May day as I did, they would have been comforted by the thought that God knows each hero's grave, and he will not forget. Neither had he forgotten this one, but, as if anticipating the beautiful ceremony of our Memorial Day, had literally surrounded the resting place of this unknown hero with the greatest profusion of beautiful flowers." So these soldiers come back not only to gather souvenirs and to remember and to see, but also to honor the fallen comrades that they had lost a year before and in the years before that. Each soldier that they find on this battlefield is representative of a friend, or a brother, or a comrade. And then think about it, it's a juxtaposition that these men are on their way to celebrate a great victory. They've just won the war. They know the price of the war, and it's impressed upon them as they pass through these battlefields. But when you see it again, when you see it put in your face, essentially, as you walk through this, how does that victory look to you? Does it change your view on the war? Does it change your view on the cost of the war? And perhaps by the end, these soldiers are only glad that it's done, as Rice Bowles said, "It made us all the more thankful that the war was at last ended."